The Chairman of the Senate, Professor Zigmas Lideka, and Rector, Professor Juozas Augutis, are awarding His Excellency President Higgins with the diploma, the University Medal, and the University Present of Ex Libris.
Agwini ko, mille buika sasakten firkin folchus vensha. Distinguished President Adamkus, you honor me by your presence. Thank you for your kind words. Ministers, Excellencies, members of the Seimas, mayors, rector, members of the Senate of the University, members of the learned community of this university in which I am being honored, Vytautas Magnus University. May I begin by thanking you all for the warmth of your welcome to this important center of learning in Kaunas. Permit me just to say 2 or 3 words in my own language. Tá tábhacht iontak ag buint leis an ghaile na cóiliúd ar acadúlias na tíri éasúliad in Europe, agus glachim leis an grádam seo, leis an úlachtach tisc gohfuil an médaine áirithe bhfuil se bruntar a cheana féin go áid ó héh cuasaí intellectus politiúlite. It is such a very great honor for me to receive this award from your university, a university whose history so closely parallels that of modern Lithuania, tracing as it does its origins to the early days of the Republic, abolition during the dark days of Soviet occupation, and revival again as by the assertion and recovery of your independence. And the distinguished list of past recipients is truly impressive, and I am profoundly moved to be among them. As I accept this honor, I am conscious that I am under the watchful gaze of the portrait of St. Thomas Aquinas and Summa Theologica. I think with the passage both of time and the evolution of his works into doctrine, it is sometimes perhaps easy to forget what a truly radical thinker Aquinas was. He was a man who, looking at the world around him, saw it to be in flux, and he found the prevailing orthodoxy lacking. His voice was, perhaps at its best, a dissenting voice, and with great courage and intellectual vigor, he enkindled a new and compelling paradigm of thought, balancing on the one hand the demands for orthodoxy in a theology that not only nursed certainty, but sought to impose it, and on the other, a theology and philosophy which had retained some categories of both wonder and experience, faith and reason. He made his attempt in ways which influenced Western thought for centuries. Perhaps it was too heavy, that burden of injustices with which he struggled. I do not suggest he was the first or indeed the only person to explore such particular avenues of thought. Such attempted balances, the challenge of which remains with us, but in bequeathing us an almost unparalleled legacy of commitment to scholarship, a commitment he shared with such as Vytautas Magnus and Bonaventura. He has left an indelible footprint on the landscape of human thought. Whether his works provide solace or provoke rebuttal, his intellectual legacy is proof that paradigms of thought are not eternal. They can and do change. Today we are so desperately in need of that kind of scholarly rigor, informed critique and independence of thought, that capacity to question, even more importantly, to listen, to critically evaluate, to dissent without descending into demagoguery and retain the necessary elements of discourse, to dare to suggest novel ways of meeting the great challenges of our time. These are emancipatory skills. They are necessary for participatory citizenship. And I believe as I speak in a university, there are skills that can be taught. And they are essential in protecting their citizens of now and the future from any hubris of the strong. We must demand and secure our right to define and participate in a new period of history, including the form that the future of the European Union will take. As Aquinas said, it is better to illuminate than merely to shine, to deliver to others contemplated truths than merely to contemplate. It is vital, therefore, that we, the academic community and public representatives alike, labour to ensure that our young people receive the fullest possible education based on pluralist principles, ones that prepare them for life as well as for work. The value that this university places on the teaching of liberal arts is another of the many reasons that I so prize the honour you have given me this afternoon. For example, in both of our cases, one of the rewards of the study of history is to learn to reflect on our past, to identify common threads, and in so doing to find keys to unlock perhaps pathways to our future, pathways that are inclusive and humanistic. For Ireland and Lithuania, when we look to our past, we see nations with deep historical roots and treasured cultural identities, both of which helped us sustain our sense of self and our long struggles for statehood. Thus, I'm particularly honoured to be in Lithuania in this year of the centenary of your independence. As you charted your course to national freedom, so too was my country making its own arduous journey to self-determination. In Ireland, we are in the midst of what has been called a decade of centenaries, a series of commemorations marking, if you like, the momentous revolutionary and at times very different approaches taken in the years leading to and following the foundation of our state. Maruk Thron Herin, as President of Ireland, I've endeavoured to encourage a process of what I have called ethical remembrance, suggesting, reflecting that it is worthy to reflect on those similar events in a way that is sensitive to and accepting of the manifold and sometimes competing, sometimes absent perspectives of our history. In doing so, I have drawn on the work of European writers such as Paul Ricoeur, Richard Carney, Hannah Arendt, and indeed, more recently, David Rieff. Re-engaging with the past as a project that is ethically driven, seeking to understand and build a bridge to the other, creates a need to remember, to forgive. Sometimes, in the interest of ethics, to park or forget. But ultimately, the purpose is to release us from the confines of the wounds of the past events, so that we might be free to imagine a more fulfilling future. Conscious that I'm speaking in a university, I do suggest that as citizens and academics, we must all value, deepen, and extend what space there might be for such an inclusive discourse. I think all over Europe, and between, if you like, previous European colonizing powers might well take that practice and review and reflect on their previous relationship with continents such as Africa and South America. History with other categories in its historiography, open to real evidence, re-evaluation, indeed revision, is a vital part of citizenship in history that belongs to all of our people. In the year 1919, after you gained your independence, one of the early acts of the very first Dáil Parliament of Ireland was to issue a message to the free nations of the world. It was issued in 3 languages, Irish, French, and English. It sought to establish the abiding principles upon which our foreign policy would rest. It stated, Marhapla, the Irish government believes in freedom and justice as the fundamental principles of international law, because she believes in a frank cooperation between the peoples for equal rights against the vested privileges of ancient tyrannies, because the permanent peace of Europe can never be secured by perpetuating military dominion for the profit of empire, but only by establishing the control of government in every land upon the basis of the free will of a free people. We demonstrated our commitment to such fundamental principles by turning it into instruments of foreign policy and diplomacy. For example, by being one of only 3 states to have never in any way recognized the occupation of Lithuania by the Soviet Union. That is why on the 23rd of August 1989, we in Ireland could marvel at that somatic act of solidarity when some 2 million people from this country and Latvia and Estonia held hands to form a human chain over 600 kilometers long in a defense of freedom, an act of extraordinary peaceful defiance, claiming their place amongst the free and independent nations of the world. It is a matter of great pride to the people of Ireland that less than 15 years later, you took your place amongst the member states of the European Union in Dublin on the 1st of May 2004. At a reception in Orsanuktra, the home of the President, it was referred to as the Day of Welcomes. That is what we christened it, and it was a truly remarkable moment in the history of our union. The late Seamus Heaney, who had such a great respect for and whose work drew so heavily indeed from that rich tapestry of European culture, recited a poem he had written for the occasion. So on a day when newcomers appear, let it be a homecoming, and let us speak the unstrung word as it behoves us, move lips, move minds, and make new meanings flare like ancient beacons signaling peak to peak. It is worthy of note that there are several beacons in the line, not a single one. As ever, indicating the power of a poet to distill meaning and emotion, in just a few words he captured the essence of the occasion. This arrival of new members was a moment of healing, but also of hope. Hope for the founding ideals upon which the Union was built. Our shared institutions and our shared values, it was felt, had a capacity for building bridges across a common space divided, that might have been at the mercy in previous times of an imperialist tendency, and so recently and artificially divided by a wall. But that now has the capacity to make a new future different from the old. At a time when these founding ideals seem increasingly maligned or forgotten, and the living memory of the great catastrophe that stands as background to the birth of our union fades, it is critical that we do remember that the European Union is first and foremost a union founded upon the invocation of fundamental values. Forged from the embers of the Second World War, ours is a union that seeks to be based on peace, freedom, and democracy. A union based on the rule of law, respect for human rights, equality, and human dignity. A union with the capacity to leave the dark, colonizing past behind, and to demonstrate cooperation and solidarity throughout the world with all of humankind. These are values that can never be taken for granted or assumed to be unchallenged, particularly those who know only too well the pain and isolation that their absence causes. As a small in population terms fledgling independent state, Ireland and Lithuania committed our people to these ideals and to each other. In both of our cases, our decision was that our sovereignty, so long fought for, would be neither impinged nor extinguished, as it had been so often in the past, but could be shared, and in that sharing it would be expanded to create a common space, one that we share to this day, one in which our citizens travel, study, and work, encountering one another in a spirit of friendship and solidarity. In the years since our European destinies have ever been more intertwined, not least through the tens of thousands of your sons and daughters who now call Ireland home, and they add so much to the vibrancy and diversity and texture of Irish life. But of course we Irish only too well know the gnawing ache that emigrants in their leaving can carry with them, and the void that they leave behind at their point of origin, their home and community. After all, these feelings are at the centre of our literary and musical inheritance in both of our cases. To borrow again from the words of my friend the late Seamus, they know what it is to live in two places at the one time and in two times at the one place. And yet through them and through our joint work in the European Union, we have come to know each other better. And I am here today to celebrate that deepening friendship and to look to its future. I greatly welcome our increased opportunities for engagement within the European Union, which connects us across a vast range of ideas and areas, social, cultural, political, and economic. In a union that urgently needs to address the challenges of sustainability and climate change, our last great gesture of hope internationally. In such a union, we must ensuring that there are opportunities for our young people, the urgent need to rebuild economic and social cohesion within and between our member states, to reconnect with the European street, to advocate together for a more just international order. It is essential that we, Ireland and Lithuania, work together to build shared perspectives and to help each other amplify our voices. We may be nations with small populations on the edge of different seas, on the opposite sides of the continent, but it is clear that we share our responsibilities. We are committed to being at the heart of European policy making. Indeed, it is a responsibility and a right. In so being, we must be cognizant that the policy choices that we make have far-reaching implications for human beings, for the most vulnerable amongst us, and for our increasingly fragile planet. We must, all of us, as members of the European Union, therefore look beyond the immediate policy challenges and towards the vista of our shared European future. When I visited Greece earlier this year, I emphasized that the future of Europe cannot rest on a limited conversation between the strongest, nor, I should add, the most proximate. For example, the United Kingdom's departure will have significant implications for all member states, but nowhere will it be more keenly felt than in Ireland. The history of that which many refer to as the Troubles on our island are well known, but perhaps less appreciated is the crucial role the European Union has played in the pursuit and maintenance of the cherished peace that had eluded us for so long. The European Union has over the decades provided generous and timely political and financial support for peace and reconciliation on our island. It has, with our other friends, helped to foster new cross-border and cross-community relationships and linkages that were vital. More intangibly, but no less crucial, it has provided much of the wider context and framework for peace, a framework in which barriers melt away and cooperation in areas from tourism to agriculture, from education to civic society, become not just possible, but become the norm. So I want to thank Lithuania and all of our European partners for the understanding they have demonstrated for Ireland's unique concerns in the Brexit negotiations, and in particular for the resolute support you've shown in protecting the gains of our peace process and the Northern Ireland Peace Agreement. There could be no more meaningful expression of European solidarity. At the same time, we recognize that in a palpable sense, European solidarity is fraying. Solidarity is the cornerstone of our union. Like the peace on our island, it must be fostered and cherished. There is an undeniable discord on the European street, a sense that social and economic cohesion has fractured. When he visited Ireland in February, Foreign Minister Linkevicius kindly participated in a debate in University College Cork on the theme of Ireland and Lithuania and the European Union. He described what we are experiencing as a stress test of our European unity, our values, and our leadership. I very much agree. The strength we must demonstrate together must, I believe, be value-based, with a capacity to endure, one that will also have the capacity to defend multilateralism and resist any intimidations to resile to a privileging of militarism rather than diplomacy. I firmly believe that Ireland, and indeed Lithuania's destiny, lies at the heart of a European Union that lives up to the very best ambitions of its founders and to the aspirations of its citizens. The founders of European integration would have been amongst the first to call for us to embrace the pluralist and inclusive debate needed to overcome our current, and as I am in a school of theology, let me call it, crisis of European faith. It is a time for collective reflection, shared decision-making processes, not the imposition of hubristic and singular certainties drawn from a narrow furrow. Yet, as Pope Francis reminded the leaders of the Union when he addressed them on the occasion of the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Treaty of Rome in Rome, a crisis is not only a dark moment of confusion and fear, but also a conjuncture at which we see errors in full light, enabling us to see more clearly all of the possibilities for a more hopeful future. The word crisis, Pope Francis stated, has its origin in the Greek verb krino, krinein, which means to discern, to weigh, to assess. Ours is a time of discernment, one that invites us to determine what is essential and to build on it. Those were Francis's words. Ireland and many of the nation states of Europe have experienced profound and prolonged economic and social crisis over the past 10 years, some generated internally and some exogenous, generated as a consequence of the global financial crisis. That larger global crisis revealed the weaknesses of the prevailing ideas and orthodoxies that preceded and in some respects created the conditions for the crisis itself. For far too much time, a single economic discourse has dominated in our union and across the world, one that was and perhaps still remains inadequately challenged and contested. Based on a deep belief in extreme individualism, it has too often been presented as inevitable rather than as one policy choice among many, choice which should be made by democratically elected governments. Our union has been at times riven and divided by the multiple crises that we confront, and solidarity between member states has been strained. We have too often, and times continue, to reduce the term European Union to the level, as it appears to some, as an oxymoron. To avoid that, we must stand up for social Europe, the social Europe that we know to be possible. Now is indeed the time for discernment, and to all of us who believe not just what is best for our union, but for democracy itself. The wide debate of which I speak about the future nature of our union should be one that is affirming, not disheartening. We need to hear from the highest to the lowest level of the institutions of the European Union that a discourse on social Europe is welcome, that critical and pluralist scholarship, such as it practiced in this university, is welcome in that discourse. The evidence that such a willingness exists at the moment or is favoured is at times very weak. As that distinguished German philosopher Jürgen Habermas has reminded us, without the constant exercise of public deliberation, without citizens being enabled to submit their arguments to rational disputation, democracy itself will not survive. Our union can no longer be constructed and reconstructed simply by amendments from above. If it is to survive in this new century, it must be renewed and rebuilt as well from below. And this inevitably inclusive project must not become the preserve of the strong and powerful, whether in the form of a conversation between the largest states of our union or the unaccountable and non-transparent economic actors which increasingly dominate the organization of consumption, production, and distribution. Those member states such as Ireland and Lithuania that have endured long and unremitting struggles for national independence, and our peoples seek a union of equals, one that acts for the benefit of all European citizens. And we have an egalitarian and humane European inheritance upon which to draw and refer, one that encompasses the vast expanse in times and space that characterizes our continent. From the Summa Theologica of Thomas Aquinas to the poetry of Thomas van Clover, we often speak of the founders of the contemporary European Union. And while we should recognize the vision of those statesmen 60 years ago, we must also acknowledge the moral patrimony that was available to them and is available to us as we speak to reshape our shared union. In its founding moments, the European Union was not a project dedicated solely to the freedom of the markets or of capital. It drew on the rich patrimony I have referred to. It envisioned a larger freedom, one that can only be achieved through the vindication of the fundamental social, economic, and cultural rights. And one of the most morally compelling visions and inclusive visions of European internationalism, considered one of the founding documents of European integration, emerged from the Italian resistance movement. I speak of the manifesto composed in captivity by Altiero Spinelli and Ernesto Rossi, one of the founders of the anti-fascist Giustizia e Libertà on the island of Ventotene in 1941. That manifesto in its day was remarkable for articulating the demand for a federation of European states dedicated to disarming the worst passions of European nationalisms, and in asserting that such a union could only be achieved and would only be preserved if it was capable of continuing what was called the historical process of the struggle against social inequalities and privileges. The home of the European Parliament is named after Spinelli. It is named after someone who gave voice to the emerging European demos. And we might ask then whether our union is today capable, committed intellectually and institutionally, to giving co-equal representation to the spirit of Ventotene and to the as it is to the spirit of Frankfurt. For in this new century we shall confront both new and old challenges, and the pressing need for just and sustainable development, the necessity of protecting human rights of those fleeing war, persecution, and famine, the growing inequalities in income opportunity and wealth, both within and between countries, and above all, the urgent need to address the causes of climate change and to mitigate its consequences as a matter of urgency. We cannot continue to have credibility if we continue to privilege economic models that serve only to widen inequalities, to create or deepen rather than mitigate instability, and to degrade rather than protect our environment. These are, after all, not only European but global challenges, and they require global solutions. 3 years ago, Pope Francis again, in Laudato Si', wrote of our duties to the other peoples of our planet. In the present stage of global society, where injustices abound and growing numbers of people are deprived of basic human rights and considered expendable, the principle of the common good immediately becomes, logically and inevitably, a summons to solidarity and a preferential option for the poorest of our brothers and sisters. For our solidarity must extend beyond our borders. In this precarious world, global solidarity is the most important contribution we can make to peace and stability. in our shared commitment to undertake international peace support missions to prevent and resolve conflict in the support of the United Nations. Lithuania and Ireland give shape to that solidarity, both of us together, sustaining and working for peace. These commitments also demonstrate the important role that small nations can and do play in securing peace. And as a small state, Ireland believes that the multilateralism to which I've referred, as being now under so much serious threat, is the best platform for projecting our values and our voice on the global stage. As we experience a worrying global retreat from multilateralism, the European Union and its member states must continue to work strongly in support of the United Nations, with which we share not only important values, but that fundamental commitment to multilateralism in which so many of the peoples of the world have placed their hopes. Peace cannot be built, nor can it be sustained by any narrow version of diplomacy that is defined by transaction in service of a national advantage at the cost of other nations. Peace rests but upon a diplomacy of the common good. That is one of the finest and, I think, most important definitions of diplomacy. One built on mutual respect and understanding. One that is open to the possibilities of the future. One that rejects invocation of fear. A European Union recoiling to a diplomacy overwhelmingly reliant on fear. A European Union which defines security in terms of military preparedness alone will be unable to meet the challenges of our century, nor will it be capable of demonstrating the solidarity demanded by the Paris Climate Accords on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Frankly, for our future generations, it offers failure. We must craft a European Union based on hope and resolve as to values that can be shared, one that can unequivocally assert that it is through deliberation that a community of nations can discern and give shape to the common good. Dear friends, to finish, as I draw my remarks to close, I am reminded of the words of one of the distinguished recipients of the honor you have bestowed on me today, a native son of Lithuania, Czesław Miłosz. And he wrote, "Human reason is beautiful and invincible. No barbs, no barbed wire, no pulping of books, no sentence of banishment can prevail against it. It establishes the universal ideas in language and guides our hand as we write truth and justice with capital letters, lie and oppression with small. It puts what should be above things as they are, is an enemy of despair and a friend of hope. It does not know Jew from Greek or slave from master, giving us the estate of the world to manage." At this critical juncture in history, we have indeed been given the estate of the world to manage. We have available to us not only the valuable instruments of reason, I suggest, but also the music of the heart. We must allow both to give us hope. Let us do it well in our European Union of future generations. Let us do it ethically, with humanity and humility and compassion in our hearts. And most of all, let us do it together. Lekeiger, Berbanocht. Thank you.